So it was really, thank you. It was an amazing line of talks. I think in a way quite complementary, coming from restoration to the idea of rural modernity to finally to the scope of, let's say, of architecture and technology and handbooks in that. I have written some keywords to start, and actually I would like then to give the option of questions to the public before we start our conversation. But I think we saw that actually there are different ways of seeing, from the artist actually to a political engagement, a kind of an idea of a society, but also implicit cultural project, again, in the way that the painting has been constructed, that, let's say, graphic identities and ideologies were being portrayed, back to the aspect again of architecture, engineering, technology, and in this, the engineering of this relationship between animals and humans. Extremely interesting as well, the concept of assemblage, So I think also that was saw in all of you, So I think that it was quite central to the three talks. But going back again, I think what we can see and basically some key points to be discussed is the idea of heritage, and especially with your talk on restoration, So actually what are the values that were important to be represented in that specific moment in time, more than 400 years ago, and that somehow were as well portraying a ideology, a cultural ideology, as you said, the idealized bow that surpasses reality, that somehow exists today with the idea of the cowboard, So that we're still sort of constructing realities to cope with our own way of collective living. But also perhaps then, ethical questions, as Luis Alejandre was bringing forward, as well in the idea, let's say, of cultural landscape of heritage, actually what it's the ethics that we have been, how ethics actually have been moving, and have been shaping society, and the point where we are now today. Very interesting as well with the notions of the pedagogical missions, So that I think as well going back to the painting, And with the children's involvement, that actually also this sort of the pedagogy of a certain type of landscape, a way of living. But then finally, I think, you brought the dimension, Sophia, of the generalized, So I think more in that clear look into the scope of technology, and especially how labor as well, it's being manipulated by technology, our lives being manipulated by technologies. So there are several, let's say, beautiful concepts to discuss. I think in the idea of a cultural landscape, how we have been shaping that in time, and also the point of rural architecture. So I would like first to give the floor, if there are questions, to our wonderful speakers of this morning to start our conversation. Please.
Thank you. I have a question to you, Sophia. So it also maybe like also as a reflection of like the work of the restoration of and how the painting was drawn. What you see in the handbooks, they are really focusing on like the cow well-being through their health. So if there's any like prevention of disease, but I didn't hear in your story, and I don't know, I assume there won't be much, but like, is there like a moment where they study like the cow more in depth and go beyond like well-being only based on like disease, or and that they through that use that in the design of the farm building?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, sorry, I usually I'm very quick in my talks, so maybe I don't go in much depth as I speak. But no, it's very interesting because I think at least until the turn of the century, the focus is on health. So to avoid the spread of any kind of disease coming from the cows or from the animals or from the outside world to the animals. But as far as I could see, and starting from the 1920s, 1930s, we start to see more of an in-depth knowledge on how the animals behave, not only for the, let's say, the limits in their, to limitation in health practices, but also in how to extract more value out of their bodies by capitalizing on their behavior. So we start to see like extra design solutions, sometimes to counterbalance new construction technologies like concrete. So concrete was, again, advertised as this gospel of prosperity and modernity, but concrete was not good on the knees of the cows, for example. So many of these handbooks later on, the 40s, 50s, promoted the use of mattresses for the cows, like foam mattresses, so that the cows could at least sit on a foam mattress because the floor was made in concrete. So we start to see a growing interest in the behavior, in ethology, and how this ethology could be capitalized, of course, for the profit of the farmers.
Maybe a second follow-up question. Did you ever see that there was like a change of how they were designing the farms based on like the differences? Like there's different models and different schemes of how they're making the animal welfare, so how they're like measuring like the happiness and the well-being of the cow. Did you see in a way that there's a change in how they are then describing it in the handbook?
Maybe not yet, because I think animal welfare became a topic that was discussed also by engineers and construction companies quite later on, maybe in the 70s. So what I'm seeing are sources that are not really taking the let's say the role of animal welfare in consideration, as long as it's profitable. So I guess animal welfare became a topic debated, I guess, after Peter Singer's animal liberation books and all the other, animal ethics books that came out in the 70s. But it could be something to see. Now, most of the handbooks that are being suggested to the students in animal production bachelors always have the welfare chapter in it. So maybe now, of course, you should, I guess it's a thing.
Thank you.
Young questions, please.
Thank you very much. Those were wonderful presentations to start the day. And I'm going to attempt to ask a question to all three presentations at the same time. So we'll see if it works. Because I think there was like a really interesting possible theme around visibility and invisibility in all three presentations, right? So in the restoration, we saw the children kind of connecting with the cow in this painting. That's a kind of old version of what a life on a farm might be like for a cow, even if it's a compiled cow, right? But you talked about it also being part of the landscape, right? So I'm curious, in that sense, what does it mean then to kind of bring that image back into like a kind of more common understanding of what's possible in farming? And then also image making in your presentation was also really interesting, right, around the films and the kind of connection with the familiar more than the strange animal. So I'm kind of curious about how the visibility of human and animal life is kind of part of that modernity project, right? Because we also have the critique of farming and slaughter kind of being made invisible in the landscape, right? And that consumers kind of aren't able to connect or understand what it means to farm animals or what it means to kill animals now, right? So then we have the handbooks, right? And what is the kind of role of the handbooks in producing that kind of invisibility through architectures? So that's my attempt to work across, and maybe it'll kind of spur something between.
Well, shall I start from the perspective of the painting? Thanks for your question. The idea of visibility and invisibility applies to what we're doing in so many ways, both what is visible when you look at a painting and is invisible beneath the surface. But if we're talking also about the way we're presenting the conservation, restoration treatment to the public, having all of it, open for our public, young and old, to see all facets of the restoration process. That's also a really important part of our mission for sort of spreading the importance of restoration, of science, of technology to all of the visitors at the Maurits House, who some of which may assume that paintings look great because they don't change over time, which obviously we know that they do. In the case of the treatment of the Paulus Polter painting, I feel that what we're presenting to the viewers, the restoration sort of transcends the image of the painting itself, because what people see, they can appreciate the painting in so many ways, depending on their background, what they know about farming, what they don't know about farming. But the what we're presenting to the viewer is the restoration process, and we have iPads, we have fun games for kids, for families. We're really aiming at young families when we are what we're showing in the museum. But then later when we have the exhibition about this painting and the importance of this painting within Dutch culture at the time, that is our opportunity to share how important farming was, how this particular painting and the cattle piece fits in with, with society at the time. Do you have anything to add, Jolijn? No? Okay. Next.
The question is super interesting, and I think that in the particular setting of rural Spain, it becomes more complicated. When you were talking, I was thinking about John Berger's Why Look at Animals, right? Or even Akira Mizutalipid Electric Animal, which kind of ties together the appearance of cinema to the disappearance of animals, right? It's like we capture them through luminous images because they are disappearing from our lives. Yet what to me it's very interesting is that within the whole Spain, these children which were attempting to touch animals and which were super interested in sheep in the films, were still in touch with those. So those were not exotic to them, right? But they were different, of course. No, they were ethereal. They were immaterial. So I really don't know how this would work in a setting as not a metropolitan setting, right? Because I feel both Lipids and Berger's clearly is a metropolitan theory, right? That the zoos, etc. That to me, I feel it doesn't work that well in the particular case of the countryside. So that's disappointing because I don't really have an answer, but I feel it works in other ways. So it might come from that disappearance, which is happening in the metropolis, and that attempt at capture those animals. But we're on a realm where those animals and that connection to the animals is still present. So I think we need to find another way to explain that fascination, which doesn't exactly apply to cities or to other places. So something to work on. Thank you so much for the question.
No, I think your question is like crucial in a way. I was thinking about Timothy Pashurat book on the political side, on the slaughterhouse. No, what I was thinking is that maybe this invisibility in the farming structure is due to the fact that it's a very limited branch of knowledge for very few people. So it's not open, and maybe this symposium is one of the ways for us to open it to a larger architectural and cultural debate, because we don't have a history of these buildings, we don't have a social history of these buildings, or not even design history of these buildings. And so for me, more than invisibility, because we do see them from our roads, but it's more a question of anonymity and atemporality. I mean, we kind of perceive these buildings as atemporal, without a history and without a designer, and so this is why they become, in a way, invisible. And even looking at these handbooks, you cannot really see that these handbooks are mostly, stored in some mysterious collections of agrarian societies and whatnot, and not in architectural schools. This, in a way, produces even more invisibility to this heritage, or to this model in general.
Thank you very much. It was very beautiful series of talks. I was just thinking when you were talking, I think the kind of notion of landscape somehow was really absent, or partially absent from all the talks. I mean, despite the fact that, I think you were also kind of looking at the problem in relation with the kind of animal from different angles. But I was wondering, is it a kind of conscious choice to actually not address the landscape, the kind of specificity of the condition of the landscape, or how it kind of changed, or it kind of nourished certain also relationship to the relation with the animals? And when I was just kind of listening, I was thinking about this anecdote, in the kind of in Netherlands, the city of Gouda. I don't know how true is that, but it's one of the kind of most sinking cities in the country. And then they kind of changed the system of agriculture to grass, basically, which was a good food for cows. So then the whole kind of cow and cheese kind of business started out of, solving a kind of problem of a landscape, actually, in the which is not totally solved, but it somehow reduced it, basically. And I don't know if it's a kind of known condition what the situation of the countryside was in the different countries in Europe. Yeah, I somehow missed that kind of information, but I don't know if it was a conscious choice or it was what it was. It was totally absent, actually.
Should I go? Yeah, okay, no, just okay. No, for me, it's a conscious choice, and I will try to be more situated in the future. But as I'm looking for these models that are both national, regional, but also transnational, as I started to understand, I'm still working at an abstract level, and then maybe in the future we try to be more situated in a specific context, because it's true, of course, this industry has impacts on the landscape and the regions itself. But at the same time, I believe it's interesting to focus on what allowed for this model to circulate through different contexts in Europe and North America specifically, but not limited to that, because then this model circulated as we know through to the rest of the globe.
Thank you for your question. In relation to Potter's paintings, and I think that's the only thing we as restorers are able to say anything about it, is that Potter did reflect to life, like the farming life and the position of farms in landscapes. But as we saw with the bull, which is only a bull in a field, it isn't necessarily a truthful reflection what he painted. So even though he painted farmyards, even though he painted cattle in all sorts of sexes, ages, I mean, he also painted dying horses, dying cows, cows being milked, the stables and everything. I think we should always keep in mind that it might not be a truthful representation of 17th century farming practice. And I guess that's always hard in art in general, especially in the 17th century. Most of the art was either had like a biblical function or mythological function or some sort of idealized function. So I wouldn't be comfortable to say that Potter truly and truthfully depicted farm life, but he, at least with his study of individual cows and individual animals, tried to portray them in any ways possible, and not like Cuyp did or other 17th century artists did, just as part of the landscape in general, but he paid close attention to the individual animals and their well-being as well. Thank you.
I'm conscious totally. I might say there's a debate now in Spain, which I find it interesting, which is the difference between landscape and countryside. Countryside understood as kind of representing other relationships to the environment, and I find that in all those, thinking about it right now on the spot, all the institutional policies that I've shown have an idea of landscape, modern landscape, and they directly collide with an idea of countryside as this other, which is something that I also wanted to ask Sofia, that to me is very interesting and ungraspable. That's why the exhibition was just about institutional policies, which is what happens with the knowledges which were already there and which were not catalogued as scientific, right? And how do we account for them? I didn't find a way good enough to account for them in the exhibition, and that's why somehow the exhibition was about this imposition of an ideal of landscape, national landscape, which even with other examples in the fascist dictatorship come more into the fore, like making the landscape productive, the so-called pueblos de colonización, colonizing towns. And I don't know, I was wondering when you were saying so, it's like what we understand by landscape, or at least we understand, is just a modern thing imposed into another whole set of relationships, or no? Or is there a more, let's say, transversal understanding of it, which doesn't necessarily has to do with modern governmentality? But that is is a concern to me, and I would really like to hear, Sophia, how you do that, because these examples that you show us are fascinating, and they are, in a way, a form of, it's clear control and clear centralized and clearly underrepresenting other forms of relationship to animals, and basically I don't see the traditional farmer, having any voice in here, but not only in yours, also in my examples. There's an imposition from the city on how those things should be. And that was a real problem in my research, which is like, because those histories are mostly oral, have no archive, like how do I account for something that I know it's missing in there?
You're right. I was thinking that sometimes you find informations about local knowledges, let's say, in the folds of these documents, like where you have the suggestions on how not to do certain things. That not to do a certain thing is the knowledge that we're missing here. For example, there are many chapters in these handbooks that I didn't show to you about, let's say, cheese making or milk production. So what happens after you collect the milk from the cows? And of course, there were many sanitary regulations that were implemented through these handbooks, because the milk has to be, preserved in a certain temperature and with certain technologies. And so usually you have a list of things you should not do with the milk to make cheese, and maybe that things that you should not do is the way that cheese is the way cheese was made. I don't know, in the beginning of the 20th century in the States. So from there, from the undesirable practices, maybe you have a grasp of how things were done. But I agree with you. I mean, there is a problem with institutional knowledge in the archives, and then what was left behind, and totally, it's a problem with history in general.
Yes, I hope I have a somehow related question. So I found it quite interesting from the preservation side, that you had this sensitivity of saying, look, we are applying this layer, but maybe it will be easy to remove it later, because you were also doing that. You were removing layers of previous preservation moments, right? And I think it's a lesson to be learned there, the reversibility, or at least you acknowledge that, right? And then I was thinking of Sophia's and Louis' presentations. You have these very strong narratives that come from 100 years ago, from the Modernist project, right? But then your example somehow stopped, like maybe in the 50s, 60s. Is it because you feel that these very strong narratives collapsed and started having this sensitivity of allowing, to reverse these ideas, or to leave more room? Or is there a moment that you observed something like that to happen? Or you think we are still somehow chained to these Taylorist ideologies of the relationship with nature, and this is just happening in an academic environment? I don't know if you observed something in your projects or not.
In my case, it was very specifically because it's not okay, the explanation I'm going to give you, because it's not related strictly to this evolution of the relationship to animals. But in my case, it was because in the 60s, 70s, television is implemented in Spain, and wildlife documentaries start being kind of like massive. And then I felt there was a change in media, of the media I was studying, and that change in media might had implied everything you are referring to, like more consciousness about. And then to me it was like, okay, 64, which is the first documentary by Felix Rodríguez de la Fuente in public television, was my stopping point, and I left it there. But of course, as you are pointing at, or at least my understanding of modernity is tied to media, and once the media completely changes, of course it has to change or do something into the ideas behind it, right? And I feel the 60s, 70s is tied to many other things, as you were saying, Peter Singer's book and other sensitivities, counterculture, where there might be that shift. That's my intuition, but I actually stopped there, and there was a very famous documentalist in Spain called Felix Rodríguez de la Fuente And in 1964, he captured a wolf. That's a very known history in Spain. He captured a wolf, and he used that wolf as an actor in his documentaries. And the wolf became super famous. And let's say the animal entered into a whole other realm in popular culture, right? And to me, that marks something else. No, or maybe someone knows when Richard Attenborough started also, but I find that to me, the change of media also needs to come with a change on the relationship, for sure.
Sorry to interrupt you there. I just wanted to add something. For it seems like a glaring massive elephant in the room is gender, right? And second wave feminism, which is tying in with this question now about the 60s. And also what seems to be a very strong theme running through, although not explicitly mentioned, except for this one wonderful picture of the 16th century male gaze from Potter, you know. So yeah, I just wanted to add that about gender. I think that's a missing element perhaps in this timing of the technicity also of the handbooks that suddenly change at some point. Yeah.
Well, thanks for both questions. So at the moment I'm interested in what was published, until the 1960s, but it's mostly because I wanted to have a look at the, say, origins of what we take for granted today. And also it's a time frame where I'm comfortable in. I guess that after the 60s, many more disciplines became so entangled with factory farming that me on my own, I won't be able to, grasp the complexity of it and think of genetics and think of new breeding techniques and of course new robotic technologies on site. Gender is very interesting when it comes to labor. So who does the labor with the livestock? This is very evident in most handbooks. Most poultry handbooks until the 40s were addressed to women, because women were the ones attending to poultry on the farm, whereas men were attending to the dairy cattle because maybe they need to be more muscular, or I don't know. And we were talking today about the milking and how the women maybe did more milking by hand, and then it became more of a maybe male technology. But yeah, gender is, of course, very much influencing the way, especially in which labor is described and, let's say, narrated in these books that are 99.9% written by men. So this is again a thing, and it would be interesting to know today who enrolls to these animal production bachelors in colleges and universities, because I wouldn't be surprised if we were more men than women, for sure.
Sure. I just wanted to mention something that we alluded to in our presentation already, the sort of non-gender specificity of the bull or the bovine when Paulus Poulter first painted them. Is also really interesting to us. It's kind of hard to contextualize within the 17th century whether that was an intentional choice or just something during the painting process that he was still thinking about or developing, and we're really working out the order in which he applied all sorts of aspects of that painting. But when the bull became the bull is a really important moment, and tying that to whatever else is happening in the painting is also really significant. But also thinking about the writings of Karel van Mander and really distinguishing between the bull and the cow, and these are the attributes of one versus the other, really shows that that was something that people were thinking very much about in their depictions of animals back in the 17th century.
That the realization that the bull was an idealized animal, and I guess as an idealized animal, there is some kind of ideology or project behind. I don't know if you have any hypothesis on why Potter did like that, and also maybe connection with the clients of this kind of painting who commissioned these paintings. It was like initiative of Potter. Maybe you can elaborate a bit more on that.
Thank you for your question. Those are very, very good and valid questions, and some of them we haven't been able to answer yet, especially the last questions, like for whom did Potter paint this painting? Did he have anyone requesting it? Did it fit into a specific house? Because it's quite large. It's almost a life-sized bull, so it wouldn't fit in the average living house in The Hague at the time. And we haven't been able to find that out yet. it is quite tempting to believe he must have had someone commissioning it because of its size, because of the costs that were affected with painting such a large-scale image. But we simply don't know. And we do know that Potter passed away at a very young age. And when he passed away, he still had a couple of these humongous monumental paintings in his possession that were, for some reason, either never paid for by the commissioners, or they were not made for a specific person, but simply because it was something he wanted to paint. Do you have anything to add to that? No.
Yeah, it's. I mean, another question. I just wanted to add. It's not research-based fact, but I was wondering. My experience is that at veterinary universities and academia in general, women population is growing, and it's like maybe this bias of men writing handbooks for everyone, and including women, on how to do things and being prescriptive in that sense of how to manage life will change by time. But also it might change, like in my experiences, there's way more like the gender balance has shifted in animal sciences in many fields, and maybe because of that we will see more the notion of appearance of the notion of care instead of management, maybe. Well, I hope so, but maybe this is already a biased idea. But what I see is that in you mentioned this difference between poultry management and dairy management. Is that again still maybe there's more women enrolling in veterinary universities, but there tend to be a difference between like a divide that men go for farm animals and then women going for pets, and yeah. So that's just interesting that there is a tendency of maybe shifting that is promising, but I still don't know if the general general gender bias of the industry will remain. I don't know if anyone has experience and thoughts about that.
Yeah, I don't know. I just a comment is that I have the feeling that most of these publications and handbooks are still sponsored by zootechnical companies. So whatever care or management will be still management that wins and makes more profit, right? So I'm not so optimistic as you are.
Okay, well then maybe I would like to thank our speakers of this morning, and thank you all for the questions, and we will continue now with lunch break. And we come back at 1. Thank you so much. Thank you.